Well, it is officially 13 minutes past the time we said we were going to join everybody. So if anybody's joining late, you're not joining late. You're joining right on time. So how's it going, Mike?
Oh, it's been great. We've been having a busy little day over here.
Look at the beautiful backdrop. You've got the Good Beer Hunting logo. I've got a pile of trash. I think there's some pretty cool stuff in here.
It's a little hard to make out back there, but
yeah, trust me, there's some cool stuff in there.
Probably some old exercise equipment, I'm guessing.
You know what? We're lucky if it's old exercise equipment. Well, I was going to try and introduce you a lot more respectfully than just talking about a pile of garbage behind me.
That's all right.
For those of you who are tuning in to watch me talk to Mike about Good Beer Hunting, you already know, I guess, what an influence the website, or we'll talk about what Good Beer Hunting is a little more in detail, but kind of what influence it has on the craft beer community and what influence it has on other people, like myself. I wrote a pretty lengthy "we're interviewing Mike" kind of thing on Facebook to say that there's so many nuggets of, whether it be content or whether it be just the way the site's designed, that are just kind of speak volumes. And so I know you did a lot of stuff in your background that might have led to the way Good Beer Hunting looks today and is perceived today. I want to talk about that, but I'm definitely excited about, look at the comments we're already getting, but I'm definitely excited to chat with you about the background of Good Beer Hunting and kind of get into your opinion on some of the goings on in craft beer today, which you're not very shy about.
No, there's not really any point. Is anybody shy about their opinions on beer? I don't think it makes sense for anybody to be shy, I suppose. Certainly not me. No, let's jump in, man. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with that. Let's start with that right there. Let's cut out of the timeline. No, it doesn't make any sense for people to be shy in beer. What is it about beer or craft beer?
I don't know. I mean, there's something really magical about beer in the way that, first of all, let's be honest, it's a drug, right? Alcohol is a drug and has an effect on how we behave and our personalities. And it's often referred to as a social lubricator, which is a bit of a gnarly phrase, but I think we all, I think we all know how beer plays a role in conversation and social interaction. It opens people up. They get going about things. And sometimes that helps them really connect. And sometimes that makes them a little bit more expressive than they typically are. And so it's no surprise to me that people have outsized opinions about beer, certainly as a result of potentially drinking beer. I mean, those things kind of go hand in hand to some degree.
Yeah, so all these keyboard courage is really not keyboard courage, it's just alcohol problems.
It probably starts there. It's got to be at least one contributing factor. But of course, beer has also been very much aligned with pubs and pub culture and saloon culture. And we recently did a great conversation with what's his name now? It's just slipped my mind. A local historian, Bill Savage. And he talked a lot about saloon culture and its relationship to politics in our society, where back in the day, you used to go to saloons to curry votes, and that's how you used to rally the grassroots political campaigns to get people to support their alderman and their mayor and things like that. So beer has always been at the center of this body, sort of confident and political speech and rhetoric scenario. So it's no surprise to me that it continues to be part of that. This is a continuation of that tradition. I don't think this is anything particularly new. But lately, I think the conversation has turned to being political about the beer itself, rather than beer helping us, maybe express our political opinions about other things.
Is that a healthy thing? I mean, to a certain extent, I guess, discourse is a good thing. I think it's important to have discourse. I guess the point I'm trying to get at is, how good is it that people have this kind of, I hide behind my keys and then I go and trash this brewery for whatever reason. Yeah. And it's easy for me to do so because they'll never see my face. And even if they do, I'm going to be somewhere off in the distance.
Yeah, sometimes I think that's unique to craft beer. Sometimes I'm not so surprised to find out it's not unique to craft beer. I mean, I think the way that we use social media in our culture in general is still in a formative stage. It's not that long. I mean, I'm only 38 years old, and I'm old enough to remember a time before the internet. So that tells me that this generation is still transitioning to how we want to use these things and what they say about us. And we're all caught in some sort of range of anonymity online and our feelings of power versus vulnerability. And when you're a business, you're you're exceptionally vulnerable to what might be your customer base, what might just be people on the internet, not always the same thing. So I think we all kind of we're all still figuring out how we want to use these things appropriately or effectively, or how we may want to intentionally use them to gain power we otherwise wouldn't have. I mean, there are so many victories in that power that we've seen, the ways in which conversations on Twitter can turn into political movements, which can turn into real change. And then we've seen them, just drag things down into the gutter at the same time in terms of their effectiveness or their progressiveness. So I don't want to blame tools, but they certainly give us the option one way or the other. And I guess we all personally contribute to how effective and interesting we want to be with those things.
Yeah, I think we're going to get into a lot more of this talk, but I kind of want to give some people, and see, this is called ADD, for those of you who are watching who have never seen it in action. This is right here. This is.
I'm losing you a little bit. You're kind of breaking up on me.
Oh no. Another technical glitch.
Yeah, your screen's paused, and I'm not getting a whole lot of audio right now.
Uh-oh. Any better now?
Yeah, your audio is pretty bad again. It's just kind of coming through in blips.
That's great.
That sounds better.
Okay. All right. I don't know what's going on today. So we were late because my computer doesn't want to work with me today, and then I think it's because it's ashamed of the big pile of junk. I want to talk more about that, right? Like the forums, the social media, which you've been very active. Mm-hmm. I got a comment, Tropical Storm Emily. That's probably what it is. We had a tropical storm dropping some major rain on us the past couple of days.
I heard tropical storm, and then you're cutting out again. Sorry.
We've had a major rain deluge. Uh-oh, we lost him. Sorry, guys. We really have had issues with this storm. I'm hoping that's not the problem. Let me get Mike back on. We're getting Mike back. So, Mike, we lost him. We'll get him back. Guys, so if you have anything to ask, if you put it in the live chat on YouTube, I'll read it. We can ask Mike. He's getting back on now. We had a connection issue on his computer. That's the beauty of these really this wonderful technology that I use here. It's very, very advanced. Hopefully we get him back soon. Does anybody drink anything while they watch any of these? We have Modern Times Ice. I had that Modern Times Ice last week. I enjoyed it. It was nice. Range in the steep. Haven't had that. What's that all about? Aha!
Man, tech is really failing us today. I'm just going with the phone now. We're just gonna make it happen this way.
Hey, there you go. You're the first person to ever get the phone to work as an option. So,
well, hey, there you go. Upside.
I'm gonna raise it a little bit. All right, so we've been talking to people who are watching about the beers they're drinking. We kill the time. I was saying,
I'm drinking a Fruhop from Pollyanna. It's the first Oktoberfest I've had this year. How about that?
Oh, nice. in August 1st.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
I'm doing Blondes Make Me Happy from Civil Society.
Nice.
They're good buddies, and their beers are awesome.
That's Civil Society in St. Louis.
They're in Jupiter. I think the Civil that you're thinking in Missouri is the Civil Life.
Civil Life. Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
I hope they never find out about each other.
I don't know. I hope not. Well, see, I'm friends with the Creature Comforts guys, and now a little sidetrack. And my brewery is going to be called Unseen Creatures. So when I told them about it, I was like, "Uh-oh, what are they going to say?" And so far, no problems. So far, so good. So, all right. So what I was saying before we had some more tech issues is, so I want to get into all that kind of. So the way social media is kind of evolving the craft beer scene.
Yep.
But I kind of want to give people a little bit more perspective on where you're coming from, and what you're all about, and what Good Beer Hunting's all about. And so I guess it's a really broad existential like question: what the hell is good beer hunting? That's a question people ask me about Craft Manor. I never have the real answer for them. Do you have an answer for me?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I think looking at the timeline of it helps explain it the most. I mean, it certainly just started as a personal blog between me and my friend Doug. This was before it started as a Tumblr. This was before smartphones even existed, so we didn't really have a lot of ways of helping each other discover new beers, and we were beer buddies, and we would go drinking all the time and compare notes and things like that. So started a Tumblr mostly to talk to him, and I wanted him to do it with me. I happen to have a couple of photos of us playing Big Buck Hunter. So that was actually the inspiration for the name. So I set the whole website up, and I thought I'd surprise him on video game night and be like, "Hey, I started this blog. Let's do it together." And his response was like, "I'm not really into blogs." So he didn't. So he just kind of passed on it, and so I just started writing my own thoughts on there. And then when I started taking photos, and my background, I have a dual undergraduate degree, one in studio art with a concentration in photography, and one as an English lit major, creative writing. And so I started kind of, the more I wrote, the more I wanted to take pictures, the more I took photos, the more I wanted to write, and those two things started to kind of work together. And as soon as I started taking photos, people started really paying attention, more than I ever expected. And I think a big part of it was at the time, and kind of still to this day, there aren't a lot of people investing time in the production value of photography and video and design for their beer blogs. And so I got a lot of attention for that. That was news to me. I was working as an innovation strategist at the time, essentially as a designer. And so I was inspired by design blogs and fashion blogs and lifestyle stuff. And so that's where a lot of that kind of aesthetic treatment of GBH was inspired by. I hadn't really looked at a lot of beer blogs. So it was news to me that people weren't taking them that seriously on the production and visual side.
Right.
I said, I understand why that is now to some extent, but yeah, so that was news to me, and it got popular for that reason. I think it helped it stand out. And then Savor magazine came along and gave it a hat tip back in, I don't know, 2013, I think it was. That was a big deal. And then some of the stories I started writing were bigger and got more play, and they were about more important people and more interesting, I think. And so that started to change people's perception of it. And then I started writing a little bit more about the business of beer, because as an innovation strategist, I'm always trying to figure out how things work and how people are planning for the future and the mechanisms of an industry. That was just kind of where my brain goes. So the more I started to write about the business side, the more it started to get sort of a pro and semi-pro audience. Fast forward to today, about 4 years ago, I left my full-time job as a consultant to start the strategy side of GBH, helping some of these small craft brewers figure out what their 3 to 5 year plans would look like. Because back then, people were selling every ounce before they made it, and they didn't think that was going to change. But of course, looking at market factors, you knew at some point it was going to become competitive and constrained, and there was going to be a lot of pressure in the system. And so the ones that started to realize that started to reach out to me when they realized what I did for a living and asked for help. And eventually I got enough of that in kind of inbound interest in what I did for a living to start a small consultancy devoted just to beer. And to this day, 90% of our clients are startups or breweries within their first few years. And then we have a small percentage of sort of what I would call maturing breweries that are kind of trying to refresh or look at their portfolio or be a lot more strategic. And then at this point, we don't have any, but in the past, we've had even some of the macro brewers that have been clients looking at new product introductions and things like that. So kind of helping everybody at every level of the industry figure out what their next steps are. So now we have this platform where we have a studio side and the blog still runs, which is metastasized into this large platform for other storytellers beyond just myself. And we run events and experiences on the other side. So we kind of have a few legs on the stool now. And we have a lot of really smart people along for the ride with me at this point. My wife is a partner in the business. We have an art director on the studio side. I still run all the strategy. Austin Ray directs all of our editorial at this point. So he runs that shop pretty much on his own. Stuff coming up that other people are going to be in charge of.
Yeah, so I guess there's two wings, and so there's like the agency side, and then there's, and I was explaining this actually to my mom earlier today when I was telling her about who I was going to be talking to later on in the day. So there's an agency side, right? And so someone think about it kind of like I'm an actor, and I need to kind of do things to get my look going, get the right parts, the right roles, right? And then there's this other side that kind of tells stories behind the scenes of breweries, whether they be partners or whether they be people you might just be interested in, right? I mean, is that how it kind of looks?
Yeah, you're describing the two sides of GBH?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, at the highest level, there's what we call the studio, which handles all of our clientele, which is mostly brand development, and then the studio and editorial. But even those have kind of broken down now. So Austin runs all of editorial. My wife runs all of our events and experiences, like Uppers and Downers, for example, or Ali Ali, which is our big sort of industry getaway weekend at a camp in Wisconsin, and we've got a lot more of that stuff coming up. So she runs all of that. And then the editorial side is going to start breaking down a little bit more into bureaus around the world as we bring on audiences in places like Australia and Europe and the UK specifically. And then we're about to launch a new subscription service to some more analytical and trend-oriented content that Brian Roth is going to be helping us run. So yeah, I mean, there's sort of two big sides to it, but been business ventures that we're running on both of those sides. So in some ways they're very separate, and then in other ways they're extremely tied together.
Yeah. So I guess backtracking to the how Good Beer Hunting started, it sounds like Untapped. You were the first Untapped, trying to keep track of what you were drinking. So you're creating your.
I did a much worse job of it back then than they're doing now. Those guys were onto something. Yeah, it's funny. Like, it was, I think it was Saison DuPont was the one that got me to actually buy the URL Good Beer Hunting, because I went out and bought every Saison I could find on the shelf, because it was the first time I'd even heard the word. And back then, that was maybe a dozen things, and they were all from Europe. And it was the very next day I bought the URL for Good Beer Hunting, just so I could keep track of everything that I was drinking, because I was like, I can't just keep saying I had a Saison, because that doesn't mean anything when you have a dozen of them in a row. So we were immediately overwhelmed by that. But yeah, just trying to keep track. I mean, that was back when there were barely any craft breweries to speak of in Chicago, and I was already overwhelmed by the number of options, I suppose.
That's awesome. So you noted something going a little bit beyond that time period, moving into what good beer hunting is today. About the pictures kind of spoke to people. The presentation was something, right? And so even I guess we're going on 4 years, and even when I kind of started this website, there still wasn't very much. And I guess I'll backtrack. I was big into the reading about wine, watching wine stuff, and there was tons of we're all over the place. There was tons of you've joined us twice, Mike.
Oh, man. All right. Try to come back on the video now.
We for having two internet websites, we're failing today. I'm happy it was on my site, not on yours, because
the last project I worked on before one of the last projects I worked on before I left to start GBH was a telepresence project for Hewlett Packard. That it was such good video quality and audio quality for telepresence that you actually thought you were in the same room, which is nothing like what we're experiencing right now. It's very obvious that we're very far away from each other, and there are a lot of computers and technology in the way. But we'll do our best.
You see, my viewers are used to me being a shit show, so I'm happy it's on mine.
Yeah, I'm glad we're on your platform right now.
Okay, so and this is really hilarious, because the comment I was going to say is that I noticed as I'm reading through all these wine blogs and wine magazines and wine videos, there was nothing, or there was a handful. I say nothing in comparison to the amount of wine or quality wine blogs you could find that showed visual perspective, background, in-depth stuff for beer. And there was nothing that was really visually appealing. So I said, let me try and do this myself. And here we are struggling with technology.
Yeah, on our best days. Yeah, but you make a good point, though. That there's something about beer culture that persists to this day, which is a little bit shy around anything that feels well produced in terms of anything on the brand or the marketing or the storytelling side. It's funny because when you compare the industry of wine to beer, beer has a much more robust history around brands and branding and marketing. It's a very much supply-driven market on the beer side, whereas something like wine is very much demand-driven, because you can only produce so much from so many grapes on so much land. And most of them have brands that are very restrained and very kind of subtle, and they don't push too hard. Whereas beer is just like, take these tin tackers up. Here's my giant tap handle that looks like a fucking shotgun, and it's a little over the top in the way that we've marketed historically. So it's really funny to me, or it seems ironic to me, that craft beer tends to still have this taboo around brand and marketing that persists to this day, given the history of beer overall. But most of that history is driven by the very large brewers, at least in America. Small brewing in general hasn't had much experience with marketing, because there hasn't been enough of a segment to market to people for. Mm-hmm. So it's still kind of a transitional thing for them. So when we talk about production quality, I remember back when I had the tumbler, and I consider that to be one of the more embarrassing things I've ever made, I still got comments from day one about people being like, "Who's behind this? This looks really slick. This must be produced by one of the beer companies." And I just remember sitting at my desk one day, like in disbelief that anybody even thought that, because it was, to me, it was like the most hacked together tumbler I'd ever produced.
So the trolls from day one, huh?
Day one, man. And it's only picked up steam.
Yeah, look, one of the comments in the live chat is, Michael is well loved on Talk Beer, wouldn't you say?
We did an AMA there not long ago. And I actually thought it went pretty well. There was a predictable amount of trolling and some pitchforks and torches, but it was mostly, I think, in good humor and well in check. There's some folks on there that got a little aggressive, but again, that was not unexpected. But yeah. I did the AMA on there because a lot of our traffic had been coming from Talk Beer over the years, and We obviously had enough people there that were interested in talking about the stuff we were writing about, and so I thought it'd be cool to kind of go in there and chat with them face to face. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I thought it was great.
So, yeah, I mean, it's going to happen, but it's that alcoholic keyboard confidence that we were talking about. But so, yeah, so I mean, I got to imagine that once you started getting these kind of responses about look at the quality of this site, it kind of propelled you to think, hey, there might be something here. Is that how kind of you started thinking about this as more of like let me just track what I'm doing into let me tell a story?
Well, it certainly told me that I was doing something different, which is always a positive thing to hear when you're first starting something. But even back then, I never anticipated it being more than a personal blog. And so I wasn't really thinking about the opportunity for the future of that thing. It wasn't really until Savor gave us that hat tip. And that was the first year that beer was considered part of the drinks category for them. So not only was it the first time a beer blog was included, but it won. It took first place. So that was kind of a big deal. That kind of helped me understand that maybe in the world of food and beverage, like I already knew I was differentiated in terms of production quality for beer. But to me, that was more about the bar being set so low than how well I was doing. I wasn't really trying to be ambitious overall. But when Savor gave it that nod, that kind of told me that maybe I'm doing something that's, visibly unique and interesting to even people outside of the very small niche bubble of hardcore craft fans. And so, I don't know, that opened my eyes as to the possibility of what the .com could become. But to me, that was still never going to be the business. I mean, I had enough clients over the years through the innovation consulting world that I understood the challenges to digital content production and how impossible it was unless you're part of a major publishing conglomerate to ever make a dime at those things. So I never expected the .com to be a business, and to this day, it's never made a dime. In fact, I've spent over $250,000 of my own money from the studio side just to produce it. This is the first year we've even had advertisers. Guinness coming on as an advertiser for the first time. It was the first time we packaged that and sold that and made that a thing. Which by the end of the year, if we bring on the partners that we're talking to now, we might actually break even for the first time ever on the .com side. It'll actually feed itself, which is that's kind of its own feat. I'd be excited about that. All the money comes through for the work that we do in design and brand building and brand management. That pays for everything. So yeah, it's been an interesting balance. So I've never really thought about that as a business. I've always thought about it as sort of like in college, I used to produce a ton of zines for fiction writers and poetry writers and artists and things like that. I always used to take the lead on that in production. I would always fund them and then try to sell them and make it worth everybody's time. And that role hasn't really shifted much. Now I'm just doing it for a bunch of beer nerds who want to write about beer. I'm still building that platform for somebody.
Yeah, how are you working that? So you've got Blake, for example, with Creature Comforts, I mentioned earlier, and
yep.
He contributes, and so you've got what else you got? You got Mike up in Vermont. You got a bunch of people that are contributing now to the content of this blog. I mean, how'd you go about thinking that this was something I need to bring people on?
It never occurred to me that it would ever be more than my personal thing until Kyle Kostronic from Ohio reached out to me, and he just pitched me cold over email and some stories he wanted to write about Ohio. He's based in Columbus. So he just pitched me on it, and his email was really thoughtful, and I could tell he was thinking about beer in a similar way that I was. I learned very quickly that he was a designer at a design firm in Ohio, and so he was thinking about beer, from kind of similar perspectives maybe. We shared a lot of common thoughts on that. So he pitched me on this 3-part series about Ohio beer from Cincinnati to Cleveland and Columbus as a way to kind of capture what he thought Ohio beer was becoming in that moment. And I don't know, there was just something about the way he pitched it and what we talked about that I thought, let's roll the dice on this and let's see what it's like to have a contributor for the first time ever. Mm-hmm. And I love the first story he turned in. It was clear to me that he was a great writer. I was actually a little bit intimidated by it. There's always something weird when people are inspired by what you do and then they turn in their work and it's as good, if not better, than what you've been doing. Yeah, that's what it's like to run a company, man. Is you're always bringing on people that are better than you are. And his first story was killer. And there was, at that point, that opened my eyes to the possibility of there being other people out there that wanted to write about beer the way that I was writing about beer. Because honestly, I mean, as big of a fan of craft beer as I wasn't finding a lot of commonality in the magazines I was reading. I wasn't finding a lot of interesting thoughts. People weren't taking new perspectives. It kind of all felt to me like men's journal, where it's just like 6-pack abs every month. Here's another way to get 6-pack abs. it kind of felt like the same thing in beer magazines at the time.
Yeah.
And so I was, I wasn't really inspired by any of that stuff. So I don't know, finding somebody like Kyle really opened up my eyes to the idea that there are other people out there that want to write about this stuff that don't come from the tradition of these really boring magazines and actually want to do some new stuff, and they pay attention to what's going on.
Sure. I mean, that's another important point, is that, I think people will be willing to give up a little bit on the aesthetics even. Obviously the aesthetics draw people in, but if there's a perspective, if there's a viewpoint being given, and that's something that your blog has always done or websites or blog, whatever terminology you want to use, has always done so well. And what you were saying about bringing somebody on for the first time, we had a couple contributors to the home brewing section. We had our first kind of like, I guess, editorial contribution from Jake Miller recently about his time spent at St. Somewhere. And reading through that piece, it was something that, and I actually asked him to write about it because I've read some of his other writing in the past, and I read that thing and I'm like, geez, this is so good. It was so much better than anything I put up. But it's just so great to be able to share it and have a platform to share these other people's perspectives and thoughts and actual kind of, the way he wrote it, you feel like you're there. And I feel like that's a lot of the times, I think one of the things that put you guys on the map, one of the stories that put you guys on the map was time you spent at, maybe not on the map, but helped, at least for a lot of people to kind of come on board, was maybe the time with Hill Farmstead.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you could definitely say that story put us on the map. I mean, I think we'd been kind of gradually being discovered by people for a little while, but when that story came out, it somehow tapped into just the vein that was running through craft beer at the time. And not only did it really get out there in terms of reach to craft beer fans, but that became the biggest recruitment tool I ever could have imagined for other writers and photographers. Matt Curtis has done interviews in the past about what got him excited about beer blogging again, and he redesigned his entire blog as a result of that particular article.
Wow.
And I don't know, it's hard to describe maybe what about that particular article made that difference. I mean, first of all, let's just credit Hill Farmstead for being something that people want to know that much about. I mean, if you're going to write about a brewery at that time, and even now, that continues to fascinate people and make them want to know more about what's going on in beer, that's the brewery. But there was also something maybe about the kind of counterintuitive view that we took on that one. I mean, I still think that opening that story with the sentence of Sean Hill is not some backcountry monk kind of put people in a position mentally to read something that they were unaccustomed to reading about a brewery, and certainly unaccustomed to reading about Sean Hill and Hill Farmstead. So, and then the photos, of course, of that place are, I mean, a monkey with a camera could have taken something that was inspiring about that place. It just has a soul, and it's just there to be experienced. And I think I did a decent job of capturing it. I will say that portrait of him in front of his barn is one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. I think my favorite part about that story, though, is very personal to me, which is that he barely even remembers us meeting that day. He was really busy. I even had a warm introduction from a mutual friend, and he still just didn't connect the dots. He was just really wrapped into the day of brewing, which makes perfect sense the more you get to know him. He's a focused guy, and I think he gave me maybe 10 minutes of his time. He kind of opened the door and showed me where the barrels were. He answered a couple of questions. I took a portrait and let him go back to his thing. And the rest of the insight of that article comes from just observing him, first of all, but also I also found a lot of resonance with him, just, observing his body language, understanding a little bit about who he was through that, and maybe connecting with him a little bit on that. I mean, as much as somebody like him and maybe somebody like myself is out there talking to people all the time and engaging, I'm still a giant introvert, and it's hard work to be out there engaging like that. And so, I don't know, you tend to recognize other people that feel that way, and you know a lot about them from that moment. From very, less than 10 minutes of interaction with him directly, he wrote me a very nice email following up on that, where he was like, I don't understand how you interpreted all of that. It all feels really true to me, and I've read it multiple times, and it affects me emotionally. And he was really proud of it and excited. And I don't know, to this day, that's a piece that brought him and I closer together. We're able to have conversations about things that where we both resonate, and then we're able to disagree vehemently on certain things, and still come back together on it. So he's somebody that I don't know. That piece was a reflection of how I felt about that place and Sean Hill and what he was making. So maybe it was the personal quality that went into that made it stand out from the rest a little bit more.
Sure. I mean, it's an ability to kind of drag out what's beyond, I guess. Maybe not about what's beyond, but kind of really put in perspective what goes in here. And I already finished it because I'm, whatever. I think
I'm doing all the talking, so it's helping you do all the drinking.
It's all the technical issues we've been having. I've had so much time to drink, but there's a coaxing out of persona. I tell people sometimes people look at me like I'm crazy. Sometimes people get it, but I really view beer as an art, and it's a mechanical art. There's steps that you take to get to where you want to get to.
That's a great phrase. Nobody's ever broken it. I've never heard that before. That's great.
So, but well, there you go. Look at that. It's because of all that alcoholic courage there. That's what's coming out of me. But there's steps to take. Some brewers view themselves as there's a recipe, there's a formula. But what I see it as is like it's an interpretation of time, of place. And Sean kind of encapsulates that at Hill Farmstead. But it takes a kind of like a real perspective. Again, we keep going back to the word, and a real ability to coax that out of people and to kind of recognize what's going on to kind of get that final outcome in the glass. And that's something that Good Beer Hunting, I think, more than most other, if not all other websites, has been able to do time and time again for breweries, not just breweries like Hill Farmstead, but the recent article with Society Brewing.
That was Matthew Sampson.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Society. That's great. That was a complete coincidence, by the way.
Yeah, the greatest travesty of that Society article was having to wait so damn long to write it because Mike Sardina worked there. I loved that place the moment I stepped into it. Those beers are right in the wheelhouse of what I love about beer, and I like the people there. I like Travis quite a bit, and so it was awesome. Matthew Sampson is another guy who just kind of hit me up out of nowhere, similar to Kastronic. He was working at Argonne National Laboratory over here as an intern, which is like a big particle accelerator for us. And he just like emailed me and told me what he loved about beer and, was interested in contributing in any way possible, and his photography, first of all, was amazing. Clicking through to his portfolio, I was like, holy shit, I don't know if we're the place for this guy. But getting to know him a little bit more, I thought it'd be cool to have him shoot some spaces that I hadn't gotten to, but I wanted to write about, or I'd been there but hadn't taken photos. And shortly after that, the more I got to know him, the more I got to talk to him about beer, and the more I saw some of his writing just based on email, really just communication style. I thought it would be great if he just took a shot at writing a feature story for us. And that's what eventually became the piece that he wrote about Second Shift down in St. Louis. There was a piece that was, really close to his heart. He really cared about it, and we asked him to just go for it. And I don't know. There's something I get really proud when I'm able to take the passion that somebody has and the momentum that they have personally, and shape that towards something that a few months later they can't believe that they're looking at a story that they got to shoot and write that's on Good Beer Hunting, and seeing how proud they are of it obviously makes me feel really proud of what we built. It's really that shaping process that, putting Austin in charge of editorial was probably the best decision I ever made for a variety of reasons. But one of those is they get to interact with somebody who's really attentive to them and really helps them kind of work on the language of a piece. And then I'm able to help direct overall, like how we present things and what an angle on a story is really about. How do you lead with that insight? Like Sean Hill is not some backcountry monk. Like, how do you wake up a reader that quickly in a piece? And for them to just, for so many of these guys have grown up now reading Good Beer Hunting as their window into craft beer, that it's really exciting for me that when it comes time for them to tell a story, they're able to internalize so much of what they've learned just by reading. And knowing how important that is, as somebody who studied writing and eventually got an MFA in poetry, it's like you learn how to write by reading. And the more you read, the more you internalize these things. The more you internalize them, you can start to deconstruct them and make your own voice out of it. And it's been really cool to see voices like that just come on board and sing. And I don't know, for Matt Sampson, a year later to be telling the story of Society, something that I would have otherwise been pretty jealous of and wanted for myself, but knowing that he was going to tell a phenomenal story, that's just a lot of people working hard together, towards the same goal. and really caring about each other and wanting them to do well. And yeah, every one of our riders has come through some sort of process like that.
It's awesome. It's cool for you to kind of sit now behind and watch all this happen in front of you. I mean, it's kind of become it's probably the most well-oiled machine you'll find on craft beer. And
well, don't accuse us of being a well-oiled machine.
The appearance of a well-oiled machine. Yeah,
we still run this thing like a zine. There's no doubt about it. It's a mess behind the scenes. Stuff's coming in last minute, or we forgot to do the illustrations on something because the .com has never been the revenue generator for us. It's never been considered a business. There's pros and cons to that. The pros are we just do whatever we want. Like nobody's afraid to write an article about anything. We get a lot of opinions expressed. You know, a lot of it's very timely. We're able to be a lot faster at things than most magazines are because over the weekend, we have a standing offer out to a few of our guys that if you have thoughts over a weekend and you write up an op-ed and it's timely and smart, we'll publish it on Monday. We'll get it done one way or another. So there's a lot of times, you know, I'm staying up until 1 a.m. on Sunday working on a graphic for an op-ed from Brian Roth or Oliver, and just trying to get that stuff ready for Monday morning because that stuff's coming in hot. But those guys are so good at it, and they know that we're going to be reactive and interested and sympathetic to what they're trying to say. That it's kind of all hands on deck all the time. So we just get it done one way or another. So yeah, it's exciting. But the cons are that you're always trying to produce something pretty scrappy way. And yeah, you do your best. I think we've been doing okay.
Yeah. So I guess this is like a side note to what we've been talking about, but have you been able to kind of distill what it is about Hill Farms that draws that allure? I mean, if you go to the brewery, you get there and so the day I went there, we were fighting, we had a snowstorm coming in. You've been there quite a bit, but there's a snowstorm coming in. Snow had just stopped, but we got this thing on the horizon. So we drove in and drove out pretty quickly, but it's just gorgeous. Everything covered in white. The property is just pristine. And driving up, you get this like icy dirt path that already kind of gets you into the zone of where you're at. You're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in that piece, it was actually it was a little difficult for me to unpack why that's the case. As a writer, but as a person who grew up in Pennsylvania, which I would, geographically and culturally, I would put in a kind of a similar bucket to Vermont. There's just a certain tone to people up there, and it's not just the people, but it's the landscape and how they affect each other. And if you've ever been at the top of that hill while the weather's changing one way or another, like you feel like you're close to the sky. I mean, they call it a Northeast Kingdom for a reason. Like it's a special place geographically. And you can see that in the way that it affects people and how they talk to each other. And sometimes they're really warm, and other times they're pretty standoffish because they have something that they want to protect and defend. And all.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Oh, no.
There we are. We're back.
All right, we're back. Okay, so, well, I think we were talking about the ending of your thought on what makes Hill Farmstead Hill Farmstead.
Oh man, you missed my soliloquy. I was really trying to say, like, it's part of it is observable for me. I mean, it's a beautiful place. if you're ever up there when the weather's changing, like you really get to see nature at its most beautiful. Are you still there? Really? Keep losing you, man. Well, Marco Polo.
Oh, good.
Yeah, tactical issues. Say hi to everyone, Chris. Say hi, Chris. I think it's still live. I'm pretty sure everybody's still listening. Wow, the GBH Slack is on fire. I'm afraid to look at the comments. That's what you get from a live show, huh? Well, while I've got everybody here, you should drink Pollyanna's Frauhoff.
Or Fruhoff.
Fruhoff, I mispronounce it. It is the first Oktoberfest of the season in Chicago, as far as I know. First Oktoberfest being thrown or announced, which has only produced excitement and vociferous objection. But it is a 2016 bronze medal winner, and it's delicious. I'm going to drink more.
I just want to put that up.
You know, people don't appreciate that. They don't appreciate the trolling. It's two negatives, two wrongs don't make a right, I think is how that goes. I don't know. Sold a lot of them. That's all I know is I've sold a lot of them.
One of my favorite t-shirts.
Excellent. So people are seeing us. This is great. I was just confirming that. See, there we are.
Very nice.
So, while I have everybody, why don't we do a little studio tour? All right. So, GBH Studio. Let's back up a little ways here. So, this is the main table where all of our designers and illustrators tend to sit. Usually have a couple in here a day. Some work from home or around the country. This is the podcast wall over here. When I first started this, I thought it would be really cool to have a picture of everybody that ever recorded the podcast on the wall, and we had to stop after about 40. We're up to about 140 now. So that got out of hand quickly. That is poor foresight. You can see some of my favorite people. There's palette wrecker himself, Chris Johnson. Love that episode. Got Garrett Oliver up there. So these are some of my early favorites. Let's see. This is where we actually record our podcast, which never has technical difficulties. We sit there, we can have at least 4 mics running at once, all off of a Zoom interface, which we love. And I have to sit facing the window so that it doesn't distract our guests, because behind us is the street, and people walk by and wave in the windows like it's some sort of morning TV show, which is distracting if you're not used to being on a morning TV show. This is the booze shelf, which Rob Todd recently ransacked. I think he got into my Longman and Eagle 10-year McKenna, as he was welcome to do. Let's see. This is the main room here. This is the to-do list, which kind of sucks to look at, but we're busy. We have...
Where's your to-do list?
There's no such thing as a to-do list. Oh, hey, I'm giving everybody a tour of the studio while we waited.
Let's do it.
This is my fancy 6-head Euroflow control system. I've got a Gunwale ale on right now, a Nelson Savant Saison, which is pretty killer. And cool graphics on the wall there. We had a sign painter from, what's his name? I remember Bone being in the name. Sign painter in Chicago, very well-known artist. He went to the same school I did. He came in and did all of our sign painting. And here, I don't know if the light's going to turn on enough. This is the cellar, which has got some real gems in there.
I can only imagine what's in there.
A lot of Easy Orchard and Rare Barrel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, you're back. We should probably get back into it.
This is like, you know, this has been not embarrassing at all. Actually, so somebody had asked before we got disconnected again, the inspiration behind Uppers and Downers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, basically, my partner on that, Stephen Morrissey, who is a former World Barista Champion, now he works for the SCAA, which is the Brewers Association of Coffee. We mostly just thought coffee beers kind of sucked. I mean, there was a few